take it away.
I'm Heidi Aufdermauer and was part of the 2019 Master Gardener Program graduate, and excited to be here tonight.
Hi everyone, I'm Terry Pellegrini. I'm a 2020 Master Gardener graduate with Stanislaus County, and I'm really excited to be here to share with you all about composting basics.
And I apologize, I should have mentioned that we also have Vicki Salinas joining us from the Stanislaus County Library. And a little later on, she will be talking to you about some books so you can learn even more about composting.
Awesome. So our agenda this evening, what is composting? What can you compost? Composting methods, greens versus browns, the process, and troubleshooting your compost piles. So the composting process depends on the organic matter composition. Organic matter itself doesn't have to be exactly organic as in the label organic. It's your leaves, your twigs, your food scraps, all those things that's going to make up your compost pile. Microorganisms, those are the tiny little things that you can't see in your compost pile that help break it down. Your macroorganisms, those are the things that you can see, like your worms and things like that. The water that's needed to get your reactions going in there, along with your oxygen and your airflow. And temperature, how important the temperature is with your compost piles. So composting turns your organic matter, your leaves, your twigs, and your food scraps into gorgeous, wonderful soil that you could use in your garden and around your yard. Composting is wonderful. It helps reduce the environmental impact. It keeps your yard waste out of the landfills. It keeps your, pardon me, it helps you save money on mulch and compost in your yard. And it's wonderful exercise, picking up those leaves, chopping things up to put into your piles, all that. It will help get you some great exercise and some fresh air. And who knows, being cooped up in the house right now, getting that fresh air and exercise is a big plus. So what are some of the benefits of composting? Well, composting helps hold soil moisture, if I could say moisture properly here. It improves your plant growth by giving it some slow release nutrients. And all our plants need those extra nutrients that we can find in that compost. It encourages healthy root structure. Compost is by nature fairly soft and loamy, has lots of matter in it that is easy for the roots to go in and get great root structure. The compost can add beneficial microbes into your soil. Some of our soils may have been sitting there for a while and need some refreshing and need some more nutrients and those beneficial microbes in there to help your plants. Your compost can lighten your clay soil. It also helps our sandy soils hold on to that water. If you've all been watering your gardens in the sandy soil, especially here in Turlock, you see that water just kind of wants to beat up and roll off. With the compost mixed in there to help soak up that water. And compost also helps reduce weeds, especially when you're using it as a mulch around your plants. So here we are at our first poll. So how long have you ever composted before, and for how long? So this is a multiple choice question, so go ahead and answer. We have yes, less than 5 years. Yes, more than 5 years. Yes, more than 10 years. Yes, less than 10 years. And no, I can't wait to learn.
Oh.
So we'll give it just a moment here and then we'll find out what our answers are. So it looks like 49% of you have never composted before and you can't wait to learn more. Well, you're definitely in the right spot. We're going to give you those composting basics today. So let's talk a little bit about our decomposers. Decomposers are all those little microorganisms and insects and things. They're going to break down all the stuff in your compost pile. They do the work of grinding and chewing, biting and tearing up all that material that you have in there. They just love to get in there and chew on those leaves and your twigs and the orange rinds and things that you might throw in there. And it turns all that organic matter into compost by helping break it down and getting the process going. And when you turn your pile, that helps speed up the process because it takes all the stuff that they've already eaten. They're looking for more food. They can find all that new stuff they can get in there and chew up and help break down. And remember, those decomposers, sometimes you see those little bugs and things in your compost. They do belong in there. They need to be in there to break all your stuff up. So don't worry about the insects. We'll talk about some of the pests you don't want in your compost pile a little later on. Now we're going to talk about those macroorganisms. Again, those are the decomposers that you can see. Some of these are ants and centipedes and snails and worms. Definitely want worms in your compost pile. They really help to break things down. The physical ones, the ones that get in there and they grind, they chew, they suck and bite and tear material. And this is one of the reasons why we always tell you don't add meat into your compost pile, anything like that. These macroorganisms don't really care for that. And, you know, we need them there for the beneficial bacteria and the things they do, and the meat products help kind of slow that process down. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the microorganisms. These are little things that you can't see, kind of like bacteria, which are like the powerhouse of your compost pile. They really get in there and help break down all the plant matter. They create carbon dioxide and the heat. But there's also things like fungi and molds and yeast that get in there and also help with the decomposition of your matter. What's really cool about the bacteria and these microorganisms, that in the right conditions, the population growth of these microorganisms just explode. Bacteria can actually double every hour, and the more of those bacteria and those beneficial microorganisms you have, the faster your compost is going to break down. So let's look to see if we have any questions so far. Let's look here. If you have a question, type it in right now in the Q&A box and we'll get to you right away.
Oops.
Okay.
Produce.
Somebody says produce. Yes, you can put some produce in your compost pile. Things like your leftover lettuce and things like that you can put in your compost pile, no problem. But we'll be talking about the right ratio of how much of those wet food scraps to the rest of your compost pile that you're going to need. Yes, you can put coffee grounds and eggshells in your compost pile as well. And again, we'll be talking more about that a little bit later and the ratios that you're going to need of those products in your compost pile. Okay, Heidi.
Okay, so we were just asking you about what are some things you can compost. So here are some basics too. Grass clippings, obviously, but make sure that if you are using grass clippings that they have not been, your grass has not been sprayed with weed killer, because that wouldn't be good for the micro or the macro organisms that are chewing up your things. And yard waste, if you are using the yard waste, make sure that you are chopping those up. Either, you know, you can bang on them with a shovel to chop them up, or chop them with a clipper, a 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches in length. That'll speed up the process of decomposition. Dried leaves and pine needles. And one thing with that to chop those up even more is you can mow those over with your lawnmower to break them down and then add them to your pile. And then any fruit and vegetable scraps from your kitchen, as long as they haven't been cooked. You can also, let's see, anything from your garden. Like if you're cleaning up fallen fruit from your garden, that can go into it, just to make sure that there's no diseases in that fallen fruit. And also making sure that maybe there aren't any overwintering bugs that you might add to the pile. And there's a question here about adding oak leaves. Oak leaves would be okay. You can mow them as well and put them into your. And then there's a question here about why not cooked fruits and veggies. Usually we're going to talk about why that is not a good idea, because they can attract critters that you don't want to have in your compost pile. And then to go on, tea bags, coffee grounds. Oops, go back. There we go. Sorry. Tea bags, coffee grounds, and eggshells are great for the compost pile. And there's even some coffee shops that will let you take home some coffee grounds to add to your pile. And newspaper, make sure that you're tearing those or shredding them, and not to use the shiny colored sheets that you might have in your newspaper. And tearing and shredding the newspaper keeps the papers from matting, because sometimes if there's the moisture in your compost pile that you want, if you don't shred those newspaper, it will mat up and then not allow the circulation and the air flow to go through it. And then shredded wood chips obviously will be good. And again, the size is important. So 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches. And then one thing to be aware of too, there's been a question about eucalyptus and oleander, because those have a poisonous aspect to them, and but they can be composted because the decomposition usually detoxifies them. And then some animal manures. Any animal that is not a meat eater, so horses, rabbits, goats, all of those animals that do not eat meat, those manures can be composted. Okay. And then some things that you do not want to compost. Dirt and soil. You don't really need it, because what that does is it just makes your compost heavy, and it can also have diseases in it. And then it also, if you're turning your compost on a regular basis, it makes it really heavy to turn, and then that could discourage someone from turning it. Ashes from a stove, fireplace, or barbecue. The reason you don't want to compost those is because it can increase the pH in your soil. And then animal products like meats, bones, fish, grease, those attract unwanted pests such as raccoons and rats. Dairy products, for the same reason, they attract those unwanted pests. And then sawdust from treated wood, because treated wood would have some of the chemicals in there that you don't want to add to your soil. And then diseased plants, they can be bug infested. And so that is not something that you want to incorporate into your compost pile, just to prevent from any more diseases happening in your future garden. And then weeds, especially ones that have gone to seed, because that, unless there are a lot of seeds that can be composted if you get your compost up to the right temperature, which we'll talk about later. But if there are seeds in your weeds, then it's a good idea not to compost them, just in case. And then we talked about human or meat-eating animals and manures that can not to be composted. So, all right. And then compost is a mix of the browns and greens. So what is that? So anything that has been dead for a long time, like the wood prunings, the pine needles, leaves that have dried up and have fallen, and then you chop them up with your lawnmower. Dried grasses, again, something that has been dried and chopped up for quite a while. As long as it's dried, that would be considered a brown. Straw can be used. The newsprint that I talked about earlier is considered a brown, and then sawdusts. And then your greens, tea bags, the eggshells, anything that has lots and lots of moisture in them is considered a green. So coffee grounds and their filters, citrus, and any fresh fruit waste, vegetable waste, and then fresh grass clippings or fresh shrubs also. So those are all things that can be composted. The browns, they provide the carbon that you want to have in your compost pile. And those are usually things that are dry and have low moisture content. They're lightweight, and we've had some examples of them already. So, and then the corn stalks, if you want to go ahead and use your corn stalks, again, chop those up. And I don't know, I've never tried to use a lawnmower for corn stalks, but maybe that would work to chop them up a little bit more. And then again, the cardboard, you'd want to have that be shredded as well. The greens provide a nitrogen-rich aspect to your compost pile. And what that does is it keeps your pile cooking because you want it to get up to a nice degree of temperature to help break down all of those things that the microorganisms and the macroorganisms use to break down the scraps. And let's see. So anything that is kind of wet, that is considered a green and provides the rich nitrogen. Rotted manures are considered greens, and they can be used as well. But one thing to remember too is that manures, you think, oh, manures are probably a really good thing to add to a compost pile, but they're not essential. It's okay if you don't have those in there. And then we were talking about the ratio. Sometimes it's easy, it's try to figure out, okay, what's 30 parts of carbon to 1 part nitrogen? So if you have a 2 5-gallon bucket method, this is something that's really easy to try to work into your compost pile. And what you do is the greens will be really dense. So you want to put those into one of the 5-gallon buckets and keep them kind of loose. And so once that 5-gallon bucket is filled up, at the same time, you're filling up the other 5-gallon bucket with browns, and you want to push those and try to condense those into your bucket. And when both of those buckets are full, that's when you can add them to your compost pile to get that 30-to-1 ratio. So if you have any questions about that, we can talk about that a little bit more too. Otherwise, it's not that important. It's not that difficult of a science to figure out. Okay. All right, so we have about 4 or 5 poll questions here. So examples of allowed browns or carbon. So choose one that you think.
Sarah, you might want to go ahead and push the slide ahead, I think.
There's like 4.
There it is.
Oh, okay. So choose the one you think is the best answer? All right. All right. So
I like the potato chips. That makes me laugh.
Thank you. I just thought I would throw that in there for fun.
Paper clips.
Okay.
Good job. And then what are examples?
Hold on. We're going. There it goes.
Oops. Oh, number 3.
Number 3.
So what are examples of allowed greens?
Unfortunately, it looks like some of our
questions.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. Hopefully one of those is the right answer. Oh no, I don't think it is.
Nope. Let's go on to the next one.
Yeah, let's just skip this one, but we can tell everybody the answer should be C.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the next one. These polls, we always have a problem with them. Here we go.
Oh, this is fun. What materials shouldn't be added to your compost pile?
You should be able to choose all that apply.
More than one.
Yes.
I'm starting to get this poll thing down. I'm still not an expert. So remember, this is what should not be composted.
All right. That looks great.
Mm-hmm.
The bones, dairy products, diseased plants and weeds. Those both, yeah. Wood ash, very good.
So there were some questions. One, can chicken manure be utilized? Hal, I think maybe we answered that question. So it can be kind of a hot manure. So it would be one that you would want to maybe set aside for a little while before you go ahead and throw that in the compost. And then corn cobs, if they're uncooked, yeah, they need to be chopped up because they'll take a little bit longer to compost. I know I've had to, when I like sifted out my compost, there's usually a corn cob or two that hasn't composted all the way. So it's a good idea to go ahead and chop it up. And then nutshells, someone asked about nutshells, and those would take a really, really long time to compost. And
it'd make a nice mulch.
It could make a mulch, although if you're walking on that mulch, I don't know if I'd want to walk on nutshells.
Well, not keep
definitely not barefoot.
Yeah, but it could actually provide some of the air, the aerobic capability of leaving some open spaces in your compost that would allow the oxygen to get in there and keep things opened up for. Especially like for me, I'm kind of a lazy composter and I don't turn my compost as much as I should. So that would help.
I see Rachel says that stone fruit pits also don't decompose well in her compost. No, not at all. All right, any other questions? If not, we'll go ahead and move on. Okay. So now we're going to talk about compost systems. Lots of different systems. I'm pretty sure all of you have seen some or part of these. So we're going to give it talk about all the different choices that you have to make on your compost systems. So we're definitely going to be talking about piles versus bins. Are we going to put our compost in a big pile, or are we going to use one of those, make our own bin, or buy one of those really nice fancy ones? So there are some simple tools that you are going to need for your composting. Hold on. Give me just a second. I need to go back for one. Pile versus bins. Sorry. My brain kind of went in vacation for a second. So again, we're talking about piles versus bins. And And a lot of that has to do with where you live, amount of material you want to compost, you know, how much you're going to be working on your composting. You know, big piles are easy if you've got a lot of land. Small little tiny boxes or some of those fun little round composters are great for if you're living in an urban environment. Big piles tend to dry out a little bit faster. And then the closed bins also offer a little greater protection against rodents and flies and things like that. And again, all depends on where your compost pile is going to be, how much time you want to devote to it, how much labor you want. All those things will help you make a decision what type of compost pile or bin you're going to use. So when you do start composting, you're going to need a few tools. A wheelbarrow comes in really handy, or you know, one of those really fancy garden carts. That's what my husband uses most of the time. To you know, move your materials to your compost bin, and to move your finished compost bin from the bin to, or finished compost from your bin to your garden. A hose and a nozzle. You're going to want to keep your pile wet. So having a water source very close by is very handy. Shovels, both for turning your compost and for moving your compost out of the pile, compost pile into your wheelbarrows for your yard. A garden soiler fork, also known as a garden fork. Not quite like the one pictured here. This is more of a pitchfork for like grasses and things. There's those that have heavier duty tines on them for turning your compost and moving it around. And the fork is great because you don't injure your worms quite so much. It's like with a shovel, kind of cut those little poor worms in half. We don't want that. We want our worms to be in there doing their work. And also a thermometer. Thermometers are very important for taking the temperature of your compost, which we'll talk about a little bit. We need to get it to an optimal temperature to heat it up to get the composting done properly. So a good thermometer costs maybe around $25. And they can also do double duty to test your soil come spring to find out if your soil is the right temperature for planting veggies like tomatoes and things. So making your pile. If we decided we're going to make a pile, how big do we need to make it? Most optimal is a 3x3x3 or a 5x5x5 pile. Those seem to be optimal, easy to work, and doesn't get too out of hand. You want to layer your bottom with your browns, and then we put our greens on top and make sure, again, the ratios that Heidi had talked about previously. Making sure your materials are chopped to about 1/2 inch. So this is where your exercise comes in, getting in there and chopping everything up or running the lawnmower over things. So we're getting in there. Keeping your pile moist, but not so wet that it's soupy. You want it to feel like a wrung out sponge if you pick up the soil in your hand and kind of give it a squeeze. So you don't want a lot of water pouring out of it when you squeeze it with your hand. You want it to feel wet, but not drip everywhere. And then you need to turn and aerate your compost. This is where your garden fork comes in. As you can see here, this is the better one with a nice thicker tines on it. So it's for heavier duty lifting of the soil and things. You got to move it around and aerate it to get all the microorganisms and everybody in there happy. Site selection. This can be really important, especially if you have a lot of neighbors. You don't want to be putting a compost pile next to where your neighbors are going to see it, or maybe you have neighbors that are worried that's going to be smelly or anything. So you need to really decide where you want to put your compost pile. So you want a shady area if possible. Too much sun will dry out your compost pile very quickly. So a little bit of shade actually will help you keep your optimal wetness and temperature. A nice level space. So the moisture that does stay in it stays in it, doesn't run down, and you don't have your pile falling over and you know, moving away from where you're the center there while you're trying to work it. Again, near a water source. So you have a hose or hose bib close to or a way to get the water to it easily. Convenient to access. Some of us want to put our compost pile far away from our house as possible, but it makes it a little easy to forget. If you're like me, you get busy, and you spend a week, and suddenly realize you haven't gone out to aerate your compost pile, turn it over, haven't put any more food scraps or whatever you needed to do to it because it's way on the other side of the yard or on the other side of your property. So convenient access is key. You want to make sure it's inaccessible to pets and rodents. Again, you don't want your dog getting in there and digging out the, all the orange rinds or the broccoli that it loves so much, or having rodents getting into it as well. You also would like to keep it covered in the winter. We want it wet, remember, but we don't want it too wet. So a lot of the rain is going to wet your pile too much. So a good tarp or something over it will make it a lot easier. Again, if you're using a bin, one of those rotating bins or that you buy at one of the big box stores or at like a Tractor Supply or something like that, you don't have to worry as much about the water getting into it. But during the summer, you also want to keep it wet, and maybe a little micro sprinkler would help just to keep it a little moist on the top. Make sure you're getting some water in there so it doesn't dry out completely. So now we're talking about some composting methods. This right here is what's called a standard composting method. There's 3 different areas, and each of those areas take composting in different stages. When you're doing the standard composting method, you need a variety of materials. You're going to be turning it every week. And in this case, we move it from one pile to the next pile to the next pile. So in about 4 to 6 weeks, during the summer, it might take a little longer during the winter, you're going to have some finished compost. So if you're looking at this right here, this is nice. If you have a great big area, it's a great way to start. You can also do it on a smaller scale if you need to. But you put your original in the first bin. Next week, you turn it over to the next bin. And then the following week, you turn it and put it into the next bin. So you're constantly moving it. And you can keep starting a pile every 3 weeks. Pardon me.
Bless you.
Rapid composting method. This one I like a lot because it takes very little time to do, but it also takes more of your time and your labor to get it done. So again, it depends on what you want to do. For the rapid composting method, you need a large supply of organic material. So lots of leaves and grass and all your fruit scraps, things like that. You're going to need a large portion of it. It requires a substantial amount of chopping and shredding because you want those pieces as small as possible in order for them to compost rapidly. And you're going to be turning the pile a lot more. This is something you're going to be turning every couple of days to keep that pile moving. But it pays off because it can take less than 1 month for you to get the compost that you want. But again, this requires a lot of time and dedication to get this done. So this is one of the more labor-intensive ways of doing the composting, but you get very quick benefits. And this is one of my favorites. This is the passive composting method. I like this method because it takes very little time, very little labor. You basically are just going to take it, put it in a pile, all your good stuff, all your greens and your browns, and leave it for 6 months to 2 years. You just let it sit there and do its job. Of course, this is the best method if you have a lot of space or you have that little spot way in the back of your yard that you're not using at all. And you could just leave it there. You could do, a small pile if you wanted to, or a large pile, but too big is going to take even longer for it to produce. And little heat is produced in these piles because it's just sitting there. You're not aerating it. You're not really wetting it or anything. So a lot of the weeds and the pathogens that may be in your pile aren't killed. But if you want to take all the time, let it sit there, make it, and just leave it, this is the best method for you. Oh, good. We have another fun poll coming up.
There was a couple questions that I thought maybe
great.
we could answer first
Sure.
before we go on to the poll.
Sounds great, Heidi.
Someone asked about flood irrigating. So one person flood irrigates their area, and then does my pile need to be higher level so it doesn't flood? And that answer to that is yes. And we're going to get into that a little bit more on why that is. And then Whitney asked also, every week you turn the pile and you also chop and shred the contents, and you do that at the beginning. Once that's done, you don't need to chop and shred it anymore, but you turn it. So once the chopping and shredding is done at the very beginning, that's all you need to do because it's already in a small pieces.
Oh, right. But you do need to turn it and aerate it.
Turn and aerate it.
Okay.
So hopefully that answered those questions. And then we will get into more detail about the water and the flood irrigating.
Okay, well, let's take a look at our poll. So we have compost pile size should be, it doesn't matter, 3 by 3 to 5 by 5 or larger than 5 by 5. Go ahead and mark off your answers. Okay, let's see. Great, everybody's listening. Thank goodness. 3 by 3 to 5 by 5 is perfect. That's exactly the optimal size of a compost pile. And we've got one more poll here. Which composting method leaves a pile alone for a year? Is it the rapid? Is it the standard or the passive methods?
Yay, good job.
Perfect. They're all going to get A's in this class this time, huh? And we have one more for you. Which composting method requires a large supply of materials and can take less than a month? The rapid, the standard, or the passive method? And I know you're all going to ace this one. Right. 100%, I love it. Yes, it is a rapid method. Wonderful. Oh, one more
question.
Which composting method needs a variety of materials, weekly turning, and can take 4 to 6 weeks to produce compost? The rapid, standard, or passive method? And if you guessed standard, you were correct. Wonderful. Okay. So did we have any other questions in our Q&A there? Nope, doesn't look like it. All righty. So we'll go ahead and move on.
Of course, you can ask questions anywhere along the line too.
Of course.
All right, so water and the pile. Here is a little more information about that flood irrigation question. If the pile is wet, you'd want to pull it apart with that garden fork and loosen it up, and then probably put a little more dry material, brown materials into it. If the pile is dry, you would want to use that hose to add a little more wet to it, and then have it be like that wrung wrung out sponge consistency. Because when it's there's enough moisture in it, that's when the micro and macroorganisms can do their job. And then also think about you know, the seasons, whether there's lots of rain or not enough rain. One thing to consider too is if you have too much moisture, it makes the compost pile soggy, and it will decompose a lot more slowly. And also with that, it could be smelly. If it has not a very good smell to it, that means it has gone aerobic, which means there's no oxygen in the pile itself. And so you want to make sure that there is oxygen in there so that the microbes can do their job. And then if there's not enough moisture, it also slows down the decomposition. Or sometimes it doesn't decompose at all. So you really want to make sure that you have that wrung out sponge consistency. And then one thing about the seasonal consideration too is that if it is raining, you would want to go ahead and cover your compost pile. Okay. And then the oxygen. So the decomposing happens with aerobic, with the air going on in the pile itself. And then the anaerobic, when there's no air, it is kind of fermenting, and you don't want to have that happening. And that's when it gets smelly and you have maybe like an ammonia or methane gas smell. And it can also produce some toxic compounds that are not good for your plants. Passive aeration, air is warmed by the compost process, and it rises up through it and pulls fresh air from the side. So again, the passive method of it, it's happening, decomposition is happening, but you want to make sure that maybe you've turned it a few times in that passive process. And then active aeration, turning and mixing it, it moves the outside stuff mixture. It mixes in, the outside stuff goes in and the inside stuff goes out, and so it actually increases the ability for it to decompose quicker. Okay, and then the balance of oxygen and water, again, 50-50. Turning the pile, you know, helps to increase that 50-50 balance. And it also helps you to know, maybe you might need to add a few more greens to the pile or a few more browns to the pile, depending on what the compost looks like. And so we've said that before, a wrung out sponge. So if you actually took some of the material and put it in your hand, you wouldn't squeeze out any liquid, but it would feel moist to your touch. And then the temperature. So again, this depends on, again, the size of your pile and how much oxygen and water are available to the micro and macroorganisms that are doing their work in there. The microorganisms like it to be between 95 and 106 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's where your thermometer comes in handy, so that you can actually see what your temperatures are. For the best, as it says here, the best bacteria decomposers happen between 122 degrees and 131 degrees. And this too, anything above 140 will kill any pathogens or weed seeds, but then it does slow down the decomposition. And then one thing to consider too, if you are turning your pile at least once a week, you want to add some water if it needs it. Turning the pile also brings oxygen into it. And then using that thermometer to check the temperature. And then to kill the weed seeds, definitely. If you have accidentally put some weed seeds in there or weeds that have gone to seed, and you know that you are going to be doing that rapid composting, then you want to make sure you're testing the temperature. And then it also, checking the temperature tells you also how long the process will take. If your pile is too hot, then you need to add some greens. Probably add a few more greens and browns to it to cool it down. Then how often you turn it depends on what kind of method you're using, the passive, the standard, or the rapid. And then again, the seasons and the temperature make a difference too on how quickly the process takes. And then, so again, how long depends on, first of all, the process that you're using, how much materials you have in your pile, the size of your pile particles. If you've used the 5-gallon bucket method, that will help you to determine whether you have enough carbons or nitrogens in there. Again, the moisture content, is it too wet? Is it not wet enough? Do you need to sprinkle it with a hose maybe? How many times have you turned it to bring in some more oxygen? The size of your compost pile itself, if you have a smaller size, 3x3 or 5x5, you know, it depends on the size of your pile. And then do you have anything around it to insulate your site, your pile itself? Like we saw the photo earlier with the brick walls around it. Are those things insulating it, or are you using some kind of a container to compost? Those kinds of things will help with the speed in which your material composts. Okay. So for best results, you would want to have at least 2 weeks of the temperature at 135 degrees if you are certainly rapid composting. If it gets above that, then you want to make sure that you're turning your pile because that will cool it off. And then if you want to increase the temperature, you probably would let it sit for a little bit longer before you turn it. And then if it's properly moist and the turning does not cause temperatures to rise, then you know that your compost is done. Or it might need more nitrogen, as it says right there. So that would be the greens. Okay. The other thing to determine whether or not your compost is ready to be used in the garden is to make sure that when you look at it, you don't see some, banana peels or orange peels or things like that. Nothing in it is recognizable. And the temperature of itself is cool. So you would have your thermometer there handy. If it's cooled off, then you know that it's probably done. And it still feels like a wrung out sponge. It's not too wet. If you squeeze some of the soil or some of the compost in your hand and there's no moisture that comes out. And then the beautiful earthy smell is another determining factor to know when your compost is ready to use in the garden. Okay, and we have our last poll. So which composting method do you think you would try first? if you haven't done it yet. Or if you already are composting, maybe you want to try a different one. So which one do you think you would like to try? And we have, all right. Standard was the winner.
I like that. That's interesting. I would thought most of them would think passive, but I like it that they're doing the standard. That means you want to get in there and do some work. You're not quite ready to commit to the rapid yet.
Yeah. And then we had some questions. Julie asked, how do you keep rodents out of the compost pile? Well, hopefully that was answered by making sure that you're not putting material in there that would attract the rodents. But sometimes they still probably want to get in there. Covering it maybe, and make sure, Anne says, make sure to bury everything thoroughly. So if you are adding things, maybe depending on the method that you're using, bury those things instead of just kind of dumping them on top and then leaving.
Dig a hole in the center and put them in and then put stuff on top.
Yes.
It's not 100% guaranteed ever because they're rats and they're going to get in anywhere, but that usually helps.
And I think too, if it's foods that are not cooked, that you would throw in there, that could help to alleviate any pests that might want to come join that process. And is there a preferred time of year or season to start a compost pile? No, just start, make the adjustments according to the weather. If it's going to start raining, you'd want to cover it. If it's in the summer, you would want to, have that hose available to bring the moisture into it. But there really is no preferred time. The time is now.
Yeah, and if you're using one of those rotating bins or one of the other ones you buy commercially, it's really easy to start them any time of year.
Okay. And if you have a passive pile, do you water and turn or be concerned with the temperature? The passive pile, one thing that we learned in our class was that compost happens. There's really, like when you go to the mountains and all the leaves from the trees and the needles of the trees, they all get composted, and maybe it takes, 5 years or whatever, but compost happens. So if you have a passive pile, you want to maybe try to see what kind of moisture you have. But the temperature probably isn't going to get hot enough to kill the weed seeds that might be in there. But it will eventually decompose.
And I guess Julie's got gopher problems, gopher skunks, and other rural animals. It might be a little more difficult with the compost piles. Maybe you might want to try a commercial bin or something that's a little more covered and secure than just having a pile on the ground. That might help keep some of those rodents and the skunks and things out of your compost piles.
Is that something that she has in her compost pile now that come into?
Yeah, she didn't say she has it now. She says we have gopher problems, and so I would see that could be an issue trying to get into a compost pile.
Okay.
And then a large bag of unused pine shavings. Can she compost those? I would think
as long as the pine shavings haven't been treated with anything, they can be used. And then again, it depends on their size, if they're a 1/2 inch.
Smaller the better.
Yes, smaller the better. But that would be one of your browns. Do you guys ever use the probe to measure soil moisture? Or is that overkill?
I've never. I don't think.
Well, that really wouldn't measure the temperature itself. The moisture, you know, it could tell you if you have too much moisture in it. And we don't necessarily, we can't necessarily recommend a model, but you probably can go, you know, on the internet and find some from with people in their particular when they, you know, rate products.
And I'm not sure what the baseline moisture reading would be. That's something you probably have to look up and find for you if you want to use a moisture meter, because most of what we do is by feel. So getting a baseline number for you, what's high, what's low, that's something we'd have to look up or get some information on for that.
And then if you're using a bin, how do you know you're getting enough airflow? Well, just turning that bin. Is it a turning bin? Is it one that you turn? Just turning it in itself is adding the air to it, the airflow.
And most of the other ones, they have vents along the sides that help keep that flow, and they're graduated. A lot of them have like different trays or different areas. So that helps you move it around and keep an airflow as well. And again, if you see it's starting to get feeling too wet or starting to get smelly, whatever, you know you're not getting enough oxygen, so you're going to have to move it around. And Barbara, I'm not sure what you mean by acid. So if you could elaborate on that, that'd be great.
Bread products would probably be a no-no also, just because that is something that's been cooked or baked, and then and that could be an attractive ingredient for pests that you don't want in your compost pile as well. And then there was a question, let's see, about what was it, the depth? I can't remember.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was for what depth do you take the temperature of the pile?
Oh, well, the thermometer, doesn't it have a really long, when we had our class, it has a really long probe.
Right.
And so if you have your 3x3 or your 5x5 pile, it would go in basically into the middle of your pile itself. But then you can actually move it around and, you know, take different temperatures from the different areas in your pile itself.
Okay.
Okay.
Alrighty. So we're done.
Oh, so Barbara asked about the acid. Too many pine needles will add a lot of acid to the pile.
Ah, there we go.
And throw off the pH. That's possible. I'm not really sure about that.
Hop in here. I think the main thing with that is just making sure you use a variety of materials. So, you know, whether it's a green or it's a brown, don't use all of one same material. You know, break it up a little bit so that you can, you know, use a little bit of your pine needles and a little bit of some other dry, and you should be fine.
Great.
Unless you have low pH things that you wanted to put your compost on, you know, such as your azaleas and things like that. The leaf mulcher, yeah, awesome.
Make life easy, won't it?
Oh yeah.
Alrighty. Well, let's move on.
Thank you for all those great questions.
Oh, I know,
Yeah, great
question. I love it. I absolutely love it. So we're going to talk a little bit about troubleshooting, what to do when problems occur with your compost pile. So let's first talk about a pile with bad odor. I've had it happen to me. I had this great compost pile going, and again, not in a great area, wasn't out there too much. Went by it and it stunk. It was stinky. Oh, You didn't even want to get near it. It was a high ammonia smell. It just wasn't very good at all. Now I know why. There was way too much water in my compost pile. I did not have enough brown materials in there. This was kind of my first attempt at composting, and I gave up for a while because I just keep getting stinky piles. I wish I'd had this class when I started. This is nice. So when you have a pile with bad odor, you want to check it first. Is it really wet? If it's wet, you're going to need to add more browns. You're going to want to turn the pile. It might not have enough oxygen. Again, turning that pile, getting it moving. Too much green. You may have way too much green in there. You put, a lot of lawn clippings or a lot of really wet food products in there. So you're going to need to add some more browns in there to kind of get your ratios back up. So too much nitrogen, again, we'll need more browns. Too much water, again, you need to add some browns and some things in there to equal out that pile. And you can save it. You don't have to walk away and say, I'm just getting rid of it. It can be fixed, but it's just going to take a little time to do it. Maybe you have a pile that won't heat. You've been trying the rabbit composting method. You want to get some heat going, and it's just not heating. Your thermometer's going in there. You're like, it's not working. Well, maybe you don't have enough water in this pile. You need to have the right amount of water. Does it feel like you're running out of sponge, or does it feel really dry? Maybe your pile is too small. You thought maybe I'd start a little smaller, and it's just not big enough to help generate that heat. So you need to gather some more materials and make the pile a little bit bigger. Not enough nitrogen, not enough greens in there. You got to watch that ratio. Maybe you need to throw some coffee grounds or some veggie trimmings or something like that in there to help bring up the ratio of the browns to the greens. Maybe your particle size was way too large. We all know it's a pain sometimes getting out there and chopping everything into small pieces. But remember, exercise, and it really helps speed up the process and helps getting the heat going in your pile. And once we troubleshooted everything, we've got this great compost coming. What do you do? What do you do with your compost? So you can use your compost in your garden beds. I have raised beds outside that I use for most of my veggies and things. I'm always adding compost because your soil will settle. My husband calls it the disappearing soil. So you want to add some compost in there to mix it in, add some more nutrients, and fluff up that soil so your plants have a great area for the roots to dig into. It's wonderful to use in potting mixes for both your indoor and your outdoor plants. Especially if you're really into container gardening, using your compost for containers is wonderful. Since it's so soft and loamy, it's really great for starting seeds because the seeds have a great place to germinate, and those little roots have nice soft soil to get through to grab on and to shoot up some really beautiful plants for you. You can use it as a mulch to suffocate and prevent weeds. This is a really nice idea. You might not have a lot or a really big garden. So what do you do with all the extra compost? Well, you mulch around them. Keep those weeds and the weeds down and really help add nutrients to the soil too as that compost continues to break down in your soil during the year. And you can also add onto your lawn to add some extra nutrients too. Instead of using a commercial fertilizer, use a compost you've already made. Add 1/4 inch to your lawn, and it'll just gradually move into the lawn and get down there and add nutrients into your soil. And if you're going to use your compost as a mulch, think of it as putting a dressing around your plants. You don't want it directly on top of your plants. You want it 1 to 4 inches thick around your plantings. If you're going to put it around a tree, you want to keep at least 1 foot away from your tree so you don't invite any diseases or anything directly onto your tree bark and keep it from getting too wet or anything. And also about 1 foot away from buildings, pretty much for the same reason. You want to keep the soil away from there so you don't have any rot on your wood siding or anything like that. So what can we tell you? A little recap about our composting. It can be exercise disguised as fun. Yes, exercise is good for all of us. And for me, there's nothing better than getting out in the garden and working. Composting is just another one of those fun things we can do to get out, get our sunshine, get fresh air, and get our bodies moving a little bit. It's great for the environment. Again, we talked about this earlier. You keep those stuff out of the landfills, keep the methane out of the landfills too. All that green waste goes in there, and it actually does produce methane as it decomposes. Doing composting in your own yard, it kind of spreads things out, and it's a lot smaller. You don't get that gas off-gassing like you do in a large landfill. Helps reduce, reuse, recycle materials and nutrients. Instead of throwing all your food waste, your leftover veggies and things like that, cuttings, use them in your compost, use them in your yard. So you're keeping it at home. You're keeping the waste out of the garbage cans and turning into, as I call it, turning the garden waste into garden gold. So do we have any other questions, Heidi?
There were no more questions. No, not yet.
All righty.
Do you have any more questions?
Okay.
Okay, we're going to have Vicki Salinas. She's a reference librarian at the Modesto branch, and she's going to talk about some of the resources that are available in the Stanislaus County Free Library. So, Vicki? Uh-oh, where'd she go?
We lost Vicki.
I think she might be having some technical difficulties. It looked like she popped back on and then she went back off. So we could give her a couple seconds here. Hopefully something didn't go wrong. And if not, one of you gals can wing it. Because we're all library users here, right?
Books are my life.
Books are my bag. Yeah.
I love. Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead, Terry? Advance the slide, and I don't know which of you wants to take it away, and we'll see if Vicki shows back up.
How much do you know about Hoopla, Heidi?
Not much, but I know. Well, are the libraries even open yet? So that something that you'd have to do is go to the website to access the information.
Yeah, I think from the other presentations that have been given that Hoopla is an app.
Okay.
Unless I'm wrong. I think it's an app and you get it on your phone and then you can download some of these.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can download books.
Mm-hmm.
I think on your...
And I guess there's a lot of children's books too on composting, was what Vicki had mentioned. So if you want to go to the next slide.
Okay. Gail and Doug say the library is open on a limited basis.
Oh,
so
thanks, Gail and Doug. Remember the old card catalog? I mean, I wasn't born back then, but I'm just kidding. It's a lie. Oh, here's somebody, Pam says she uses Hoopla all the time and it's great for online books. Cool. And so you would need a library card, I would imagine, and then you just type in your library card number, I think, and then you can get into the card catalog.
Yeah, it looks like here you get your subject and, composting and see what you can find on composting.
Great. Poor Vicki, she waited this whole time and then she
I know.
Technical difficulties. Yeah, Pam agreed. You need the card info.
Right.
So I think there's one or two more slides. Oh yeah, aren't these neat?
What's Sprouting in My Trash? I love that. A book about composting.
I would read that. It's supposedly for a kid, but those look good.
I bet my grandsons would love these. Compost, growing gardens from your garbage.
Yeah, looks like I'm getting a couple emails, so keep going, ladies. I think
So yeah, this would be wonderful. Teaching kids from the beginning about gardening and composting, something they're going to use their whole entire life. Some will really enjoy it. Some will kind of poo-poo it until they get later in life and you suddenly decide, hey, I remember all this stuff from when I was a kid. So getting your kids books about composting is just a great idea.
And yeah, Vicky's connection went out. So carry on.
It says here that, here's the library website. You can see it, the www down here, StanislausLibrary.com.
And there she is.
There she is.
So she can tell us if the library is open and what's happening. I will rename you, Vicky, so don't worry about that part. And if you can't use your, just go ahead. Oh, okay, she's connecting to her audio. Maybe she shouldn't turn on her camera. Uh-oh. Still having trouble.
Can you hear me?
You're really slow.
Yeah, I didn't hear that. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I guess it's just not the library's night for the internet. I think she's over at one of the libraries.
Can you hear me, Ann?
Oh, now I can hear you.
Yes.
We had a question for you,
me?
Vicki, as far as if the libraries are open and what it's a limited basis, or how is that happening? Maybe we'll have you type that in. Oh, there she left again. Okay, I'll just have her send me an email.
Okay.
Well, it says here in this circled thing that they're open at a limited capacity. Face mask coverings must be worn at all times.
That was November 2nd, though. I think things changed after the 18th.
When they went back to purple, yeah.
Okay.
So, okay. What's the next slide here? Here it looks like you fill out a form to have librarians recommend books, audiobooks, ebooks, or... So this is right here on their website. You can get reading recommendations from the library. And then back to you, Ann.
Oh, yes. So you'll be receiving an email from us in 3 months. For those of you who have done any sort of research type work, it's called a post-test survey. So we'll just be checking in with you in 3 months to ask you if you have made some changes in your life because of this class and changes in your the way you garden and if you started composting. So please look for that survey in about 3 months. And ladies, it looks like Alan has a question for you.
Let's see, what do we have here? Hold on.
I think he might be asking about the green bins, which those go to that big composting facility. And boy, it gets hot out there, I'm pretty sure. I think they can kill everything they need to,
The green bins. Oh, you mean like your regular green trash?
That's what I think he might be asking is if it's when it's taken out to the compost facility. One thing we did learn when we had our speaker for the Master Gardener class was that even though we have green bins and things are being composted, even those types of places are filling up quickly, and they have limited capacity. So the more we can do at home, the better, and then there's less energy used to truck that off site. There's just more energy for you to work and get your exercise out there. And yeah, and I might have misspoke earlier when I commented about bread. Bread would be better done in vermicomposting, and we need to have a class on that.
Yeah.
How many people would be interested? Go ahead and type in the chat if you would be interested. Vermicomposting, composting with worms class.
And while they're answering that, there was a question about sifting the compost. I know I personally sift my compost when I'm, digging it out of the pile and putting it into the wheelbarrow. But that just gets rid of any rocks or anything that might be in there, or
not necessary, but it's helpful.
Yeah. It's not necessary, but I know my own personal one is that I do sift through it a little bit.
Great question. We'll have to add that to the slides in the future.
It looks like everybody wants a vermicomposting class.
All right. Luckily, we already have one. Now we'll just see if the folks who gave the class last year are interested, and if they aren't, pick on somebody else to do it. So yeah, well, thanks everybody. We hope you enjoyed this class. Heidi and Terry, any last words?
Well, there's another question here about recommending a chipper or something similar for people to have lots to chop up. That it would be a great idea. I just recently accumulated a chipper shredder and I am in love. So I highly recommend it. It is costly, it can be costly, but if you have a lot to chop, then it's definitely something to look into.
Small yard like mine, it's sometimes more trouble than it is worth to get the chipper shredder out than when you could just run over some of the leaves and some of the small things with your lawnmower and chop them up. But yeah, they're actually great. You got a lot of property, a lot of trimming to do. And looks like we have some more in here. Okay. Oh, paper shredder. Somebody uses their paper shredder for the newspaper. Great idea. Yeah.
Yep. Good idea.
Right.
Yeah, I guess if back when we used to work in offices, or some people who still do, I guess. Yeah. Well, a lot of those shred bins are confidential. I guess you wouldn't be able to take that home and use it for your pile.
We have a little one at home that we use for our mail and stuff, and yeah, that would work.
Little ones, yeah.
Just make sure that you're not shredding that shiny paper to use for your compost. You know.
Good point. Yeah, I know that's not good for the worms either. The shiny stuff, like the magazine. I don't know if that actually decomposes.
Right, but newspaper definitely would be good. Julie says that she has her leaf shredder usually works well, and they are about $140. So thank you, Julie.
Oh, and I just heard back from Vicki. There's limited reopening, and to visit the website for details about the library.
Great.
Hours.
Wonderful.
Right. Well, thank you so much to our two speakers, Heidi and Terry, who did a fantastic job. And we'll go ahead and call it an evening. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And we'll see you in January for our butterflies class. That's going to be a lot of fun.
I can't wait for that one.
Yeah. And feel free to always shoot us an email, suggest any kind of classes that you're interested in. And there's so many different gardening topics and so little time. We've been trying to do one of these classes a month. So we're definitely looking, of course, in February or March doing vegetable gardening. Again, it's going to be time for spring vegetable gardening, if you can believe it. So time to get started prepping here once the new year starts. And then we'll be doing some other classes. Hydroponic, oh boy, maybe I shouldn't have asked for suggestions. No, I'm kidding. I don't know anything about hydroponics. All right, yes. So yeah, the person who suggested it's a master gardener. So get busy on that presentation there. We'll let them start it. Oh, someone's asking if that's my yard in the background. No, I wish. Thank you. I stole it off somewhere off the internet. Yeah, it takes more water than I would give a garden, unfortunately. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and sign off. So take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.